Long ago, an exceedingly long time ago now, I traveled far south, delivering and heralding the same news of change I carry with me now, on this day. In my travels I crossed a most fertile land of green and blue, and more abundant than any of the other lands I had been in, over or across. There were many plant people, animal people of all legs, the crawlers and the feathered, even the two-legged. It is of the two-legged of this land this story speaks. In this most lavish valley, there were natural springs of crystal water, and an enormous lake that filled the lowest point of the land. There were warm and cool spring pools here and there, with meadows and grottos and glades and all manner of vegetation, such as corn, beans, squash, sunflowers, and groves of trees cultivating seed pods. There remained a strong connection between the entire valley and the two-legged peoples who dwelled there. In the early days of this valley, the people there were ruled by a queen. A most beautiful queen she was, though the queen was entirely vain. She was demanding, and commanded the people to build a palace for her that would be grander and more beautiful than anything that her neighbors of the four directions had ever seen or built, especially her southern neighbors named the Aztecs. She ordered all her people to begin construction of this most beautiful palace, and forced them to transport heavy amounts of marble, stone, quartz, and timber to the site where the palace was to be built. The people considered it their duty to make the queen's dreams come true without complaint, for royalty was sacred. They worked exceedingly hard to please her, and dragged and hauled the massive stones and logs of timber over long and great distances. As many years passed, a fear began to overtake the queen, the fear that she would die long before the magnificent palace was completed, and so she became even more demanding and commanded her people to build faster. She even insisted and commanded her own family to work alongside the rest of the people to build her the palace of her dreams. Gradually, without realization, the people became slaves to the queen, even her family. The queen began to lash their backs if they slowed in their work. Even during the high noon heat of the sun, she would whip and strike their naked backs. It was during one of these floggings that the queen whipped the back of her own daughter, yelling at the young girl that she was working too slowly. Upon the first strike, the princess stopped working. She dropped the load of quartz she was carrying and turned to her mother. The princess cursed the queen, her mother, and her kingdom, and at once she fell to the ground, taken by heat and exhaustion, and there she died. Then, in that immediate moment, the queen realized just how far her ultimate greed and obsession had taken her. She had destroyed her culture and replaced what was once rich in family values and love of nature and the land itself with naught but slavery. In her greed, she had thrown away the people and lifestyle she had loved most, and who had genuinely loved her. Sadly, her regret and insight were too late. Soon after, all of nature and the land itself, the entire valley, began to turn on her, punishing her for her wickedness, greed, lies, and short-sightedness. The sun increased its brightness and its heat, causing all the vegetation to wither and the green to turn brown until it blew away with the hot winds. The streams, springs, and pools and the great lake dried up and became naught but cracks and crags in the hard earth. The abundant animal peoples fled. The once fertile and beautiful green and blue valley was now a barren, dry, and extremely hot desert. Most of the queen's people died of starvation, and the ones that survived fled with the animals. Only the queen and her nearly finished palace remained. After all were gone, and she was all that remained, the queen was struck with a grave illness. With not a one to soothe or care for her or bring her medicine, she died alone in her empty and unfinished palace in the desert. Legends say that glimpses of the half-finished palace may be seen, lifting into view or as shifting mirages upon the horizon in the desert heat. That no two-legged people can cross that desert and yet live. That horses and other livestock will sink to their knees in wide drifts of dust. There is no water, and the heat is beyond devastating. Animals that die in the valley, now desert, mummify but do not decay, and so remains the bodies, bleached across the sands and grassless plains. On the eastern side of what is now called Dead Mountain are pointed white rocks that are said to be the ghosts of the people who died there because of the queen's greed and obsession. The once beautiful valley was now called Ground of Fire. Never again did meadows of green grass grow in this desert, but many years after, a tribe of the two-legged people came to the desert, and for 1,000 years they lived and thrived there, constructing simple brush homes of dome-shaped desert dwellings that allowed breezes to come and go through arrowweed walls. Edible plants began to sprout, and cool springs filtered up through the ground here and there. Even wildlife slowly returned with the rains and water, big-horned sheep, rabbits, and lizards. A harvest season was so plenty with fruits, vegetables, and seeds. Pine nuts and beans were readily available. The people made bows and arrows and hunted the desert and collected plants and made baskets that were so intricately coiled and woven that they could hold water without spill. So it came as a surprise to these two-legged people when one day, after generations of thriving within their desert home that had been so abundant and life-giving to and for them, there came a stranger who told them the tale of the history of their desert home, and how to all other peoples it had come to be known as Death Valley.